You ever think about love? I'm not talking about the love that comes to you in the form of a 2-week situationship that results in you making a 31-track body of work that completely eviscerated my 2024. The kind of love I'm talking about is long-lasting and unchanging. No matter what sort of fluctuations and diversions occur that try to steer you away, you still come back to that because I still got you all over me. Sorry, I'll actually stop. You see, I've been sick, so I have a lot of singing to myself to catch up on, and it's just sort of leaking into the premises, if you get what I mean. I will say one thing I think we can all agree on is that long-lasting love far outweighs temporary or shaky love. When you form a bond with someone or something that continues to enrich and elevate your life year in and year out, despite whichever way the wind blows, it just grows to be more and more special as time passes. And I think I just explained nostalgia. But that's not the topic of today's video. It's just heavily associated with today's video because the topic is about a certain game that I have this kind of relationship with. Of course, I'm talking about Sonic Heroes because apparently it's likely coming back. Am I hearing that right? Hello, highly cultured video game enthusiasts. I'm RidersDX, and we're going to dive into where this rumor even came from, why this might be happening, and what it could potentially look like. And as a long-time unstable Heroes fanatic, this is my territory. This is what I was born for, cause baby, I was born this way. Maybe I'm still a little sick. So earlier this year, I actually made a video covering an initial leak that we had that a Sonic Heroes remake was indeed coming. You can check that out in the top right corner afterwards if you like, but long story short, a couple of noteworthy leakers stated it was in the works. Although afterwards, I believe another credible source stated no such game was in the works, so I'm not gonna lie, I definitely brushed it off as hearsay afterwards. And the main reason for that is that a Sonic Heroes remake really doesn't make a lot of sense, but we'll dive into that later. But now, we've had yet another development and someone else has come out of the woodwork saying that a Sonic Heroes related title will be coming out next in 2025. We have some more tweets come up this month from an insider named Sonic at Zero, who first off listed a bunch of mobile games apparently in production, all coming from Sega Heartlight that, I'm not gonna lie, may have made my head turn a little bit. Chow Guardians, Soccer, Sega Superstars Tennis? Heartlight is going hard, and I'm not even sorry for saying that. But then following this tweet, they put up the Sonic Heroes logo with a caption saying that SHR has been in development since 2023 and is targeting a 2025 release. They followed up this tweet just saying that they're 100% certain that this is happening, that this was a follow-up to leaks from earlier in the year, and that it was being developed on the Unreal Engine 5. By the way, before you go and look up this account, just know that last time I checked it, they started posting spoilers for Xiao Generations and I was not having it, so I immediately unfollowed afterwards, so you have been warned. But anyway, nothing else has risen for this as far as I know. And while I'm not very well versed on the backgrounds of these leakers, I will say it is interesting that this alleged Sonic Heroes title has come up multiple times this year, so I am inclined to at least attend the party. But I'm sure the main thing everyone wants to do in the situation that I am in right now is simple: question the delusion. And so I turn my head towards whichever executive at Sega even dares to cross into the internet and get a speck of what the public is thinking and ask, why Sonic Heroes? Why? As someone who loves and cherishes Sonic Heroes as the game that introduced me to the Sonic franchise and made me the die-hard fan I am today, I'm confused on this turn of events. I believe Sega got the right era down after what felt like an astonishingly long period of time where classic Sonic nostalgia was milked to its very core. Sega seems to finally be embracing the adventure era in more recent titles. Whether it be the cheeky callbacks to that Station Square battle in Frontiers between Tails and Eggman, or the God-smack-in-your-face Adventure 2 renaissance that is Xiao Generations come to us in a matter of weeks, Sega seems to be more aware than ever that the adventure games have a lot of love directed towards them as well, and thus it's just as prime of a stake to squeeze some revenue out of. But with the millions of calls for the actual adventure games to come back a la Adventure 1 and 2, we're apparently going to bring back Sonic Heroes. Is Sega being run by those raccoons from the Sonic movie? Cause so I'm going to attempt to answer this question. Why is Sega continuously ignoring the adventure games to do seemingly anything else? I mean, the classic games were re-released for the 10,000th time through the Origins collection, so it's not like absolutely nothing before the regeneration is getting re-released. But first we had Colors, then Generations, and now potentially Heroes. If Heroes truly is going to be revived, these will then become the first 3D Sonic games Sega has properly remastered or remade. So my question is, what do these three games have in common? Well, to be honest, a lot the more I thought about it. All three of these games have this coat of simplicity covering them. Colors and Generations came out during a time where the Sonic franchise was getting a lot of flack for going too far in the direction of lore building and complicating their games with multiple gameplay styles. Thus, these two games stripped back the gimmicks and storylines to give us Sonic games that theoretically more so match the games that Sonic first started out with. Sonic Heroes was almost made with a similar mindset, but under slightly different circumstances. Sonic had just had a low point of its trajectory that really had nothing to do with the franchise. The Sega Dreamcast was a complete bust, and now Sonic was a third-party franchise. So Heroes was made with a similar goal in mind to reintroduce the audience to Sonic through a game that was stripped of excessive lore and presented in a more simple and traditional way, even down to returning to the 2 acts and boss format of the classics. So now we're starting to see the vision that Sega might have had here. But another thing that I can direct you all to is probably the most important factor here across the majority of Sega, the sales. Before Sonic Frontiers, Sonic Heroes was the best-selling 3D Sonic game of all time, with a reported sales figure of 3.41 million copies. This just means the next title after Heroes is obviously going to be Sonic Frontiers Definitive Edition. I mean, we've been new. So Sega may have honestly just looked at the sales figures of the previous games, saw that Sonic Heroes was the biggest selling one amongst the titles they saw, and greenlit that. And quite honestly, the decision probably was as simple as those two factors, and it also makes sense in isolation. But then you think about the actual Sonic Heroes game itself. Listen, I'm a Sonic Heroes defender day in and day out. I love this game. It's one that's brought so much personal joy to me throughout my entire life. Feel free to check out my retrospective on Sonic Heroes I did earlier this year in the top right if you don't believe me. But I am a Heroes warrior and nothing will ever change that. With that being said, I do understand that Sonic Heroes has its own list of issues that really should be addressed if it were to ever come back, which brings me to my next point. What exactly is SHR? I know the initial leak stated that this was a remake, which it could very well be, but with this new leak, SHR is not typically identified as anything in particular, just a title that's highly related to Sonic Heroes. So that begs the question, are we getting a remaster, a remake, or something else? Let's break down each of these options like an extremely extra digestive system and get a sense of what the best option would be. First off, a remaster. My name is no. My sign is no. No. This is definitely not the way to go. I know it worked for Sonic Colors and it's likely gonna work really well for Sonic Generations, but those games came from a newer generation, so it was a little more reasonable for those games to just be given a fresh coat of paint with today's hardware. But Sonic Heroes is an older title, and at least from a visual perspective, definitely needs a complete overhaul in its entire package. And then when we get into the gameplay of it all, oh people, it needs help. It really does. Literally on a hospital bed, waiting for an organ transplant. It's that dire. Like I said, I love this game with all my heart, and it gave me more joy than I could ever ask for as a grade school kid. But with that being said, the camera, the controls, the repetitive structure, hello? So yes, I am automatically axing remaster from the conversation. Unless they bundled it with the adventure games, if they just re-released Heroes as is, as their big 2025 title, it'll flop like a fish on dry land. It will. So let's just move on to the remake discussion, which is the most likely option anyway, because apparently this is being made with Unreal Engine 5, which also leads me to think that this may be getting worked on by a developer that isn't Sonic Team, which is a delicious but also slightly worrying thought a la Blind Squirrel. But a remake certainly would be a better option than a remaster in practically every single way. Like I mentioned before, the graphics definitely need a complete overhaul, especially if you want the game to visually match the style of Sonic games coming out now. The nice thing about remastering Colors and Generations is that the same base model was used for those games as the one in Frontiers, so all these games coming out in this time period seem to belong together in a sense. And while Sonic Heroes' plastic toy statements aren't going to gel that well in 2025 sadly, as much as I may yearn for those times, times. And gameplay wise, this is a great opportunity to strengthen the mechanics of the game, make the characters control more effectively, perhaps taking some pointers from Frontier's development, and inserting some quality of life adjustments in each of the stages a la less bottomless pits would also be an extremely welcome addition. So if they did these things and otherwise kept the game extremely faithful to its original vision, would it become a 9 out of 10 game? So the likely answer to that is no, and here's why. Sonic Heroes has foundational aspects to it that I would like to see changed that may be beyond the scope of a remake. I think the most obvious aspect though is the fact that you have 4 playable teams all with practically the same campaign. It is not enough that you've altered the stages to make each team have a distinct version. Especially when you compare some Team Sonic and Dark stages side by side, there really is not enough variety on display here to justify running through these same levels 4 times even with the differences they have. As someone who loves this game, I never had a problem with this issue. I enjoy playing the game so much that if this wasn't part of the game, I would simply just replay the game over and over again. So it made no difference to me. But I cannot have that same expectation of people with a different or more casual relationship to this game. There is no need for the game to pad out its existence in this way. But then one would argue that if you stripped it back to just Team Sonic, or if you made the other teams optional, the full game would be drastically shorter than the original product, which is true. And that just seems wrong for a remake to provide less than the original, right? Even if it is just cutting out the fluff. Another thing that would probably have to be reworked, although I guess not as crucial, would be the storyline. There just is barely any sort of narrative to this game, and it'd be a pretty jarring shift from what it's looking like we'll be getting with Shadow Generations. It'd just be an especially odd follow-up to have if they decide not to touch that at all while remaking this game. Which brings me to my next thought. Should it be Sonic Heroes reimagined? A remake certainly seems to be the more likely option without doubt, but just imagine if this SHR turns out to be more than what we thought. What if this game is actually something completely different that just happens to borrow a lot of the same concepts from Heroes? What if it takes place after Frontiers and tells a new story of all the main side characters, including the ones that came after Heroes? What if the team gameplay was simply an inspiration and Sega has something else in mind that may incorporate what Frontiers is doing? What if this ends up being one of the most expansive narratives we've had in a Sonic game to date? In reality, this is definitely not likely. It is way more likely that Sega is hard at work at a more traditional follow-up to Frontiers that carries over a lot of what that game did, and that this Heroes project is more so something to help tide the weight for that bigger title. But nonetheless, doesn't some sort of brand new game borrowing the ideas of Heroes just sound so much more exciting and interesting? My overall fear about the remake of Heroes is that as much as I love the game, it just has too much baggage it has to carry around to be a well-received game in this day and age, the repetitive stories in particular. But when I think about it, the same could actually be said about the adventure games, as both of those titles have things that ideally would be drastically changed in a remake. Perhaps less of the multiple gameplay styles and more of that core Sonic the Hedgehog gameplay people are constantly revisiting the game solely for, reworking the scripts to help modernize a lot of that cheesy, awkward 90s translated dialogue, and of course, quality of life improvements galore everywhere you look. I do think Heroes has a little more baggage simply because it is not as beloved of a title and has less going for it compared to the adventure games. If I have to be totally honest, I can love Heroes all I want, but still acknowledge its faults and be okay with loving the game despite them. I suppose as much as I want Heroes to come out in this day and age as a beloved and critically praised game, I guess I can also be okay with the fact that it may come out next year and have people revisiting it, realizing that it isn't a game that's aged amazingly well, even with the improvements they managed to make to it. Sure, it won't be as great as a brand new reimagined title could be, but for a quick trip down memory lane in a way to play the title on modern consoles, maybe I can just appreciate it for what it is. So I think for myself, as I wait to see if this amounts to anything, that's what I'm gonna keep in my head. Heroes is not the universally beloved game that I really wish it was, and that's okay, because my love is more than enough for it, and that's a serious statement. And if it comes out and people still hate it as much as they seem to, well, fuck them. And also, more for me to enjoy, right? If Heroes truly is coming back, I cannot wait to see it in this modern light, and I am so looking forward to it. But alright y'all, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. What do y'all think about the possibility of Sonic Heroes coming back, and which way would you like it to come back as? And let me know if it should be a different game or any other thoughts in the comment section. But alright y'all, this is Riders, riding out. And you deserve prison, but you won't get time. You'll slide into inboxes and slip through the bars. You crash my party in your rental car and said normal girls are boring. Yeah. Yeah.